Welcome to First Look, Washington Post Live's one-stop shop for news and analysis. I'm Jonathan Capehart, Associate Editor at the Washington Post. Quite a week we've had in the United States, a week that started with an unprecedented event, the criminal indictment of a former president on 34 felony counts. Joining me now, Jackie Alamany, Congressional Investigations reporter for the Washington Post. Jackie, welcome back to First Look.
Hey, good morning, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
So you reported on the unusual admonishment by the judge in this case. He warned Donald Trump against any efforts to cause, quote, civil unrest. What does your reporting show about the reason why Judge Juan Merchan did not issue a gag order?
Yeah, well, it was a really interesting discussion. I was actually in New York and inside the court overflow room, which means I didn't get to actually see the former president in person, but did see a live stream video footage of him, which, due to the nature of the proceedings, the rest of the American public wasn't able to. But during this arraignment, which actually went on longer than arraignments traditionally go, Marchand, as you said, the judge overseeing the proceeding, did ask the former president to tone down his rhetoric, but did not go so far as to ask for a gag order, neither did the prosecutors who are handling the case. That was Chris Conroy, the prosecutor in the district attorney's office, who really sort of led the prosecutorial team. They did ask for a protective order, but not a gag order, because of sort of the nature of the very unusual nature of this case, which is taking place as Trump is a presidential candidate heading into the 2024 presidential election. Judge Marchand noted that the president's right to free speech is particularly important during this time as a candidate, and that he did not want to prevent him from defending himself and speaking out against the case, but he did want him to be more cautious and judicious about the kinds of rhetoric that he was engaging in. The prosecutor's team at one point actually handed out tweets as examples of some of this inflammatory and potentially insightful rhetoric. And so, everyone in the courtroom at that moment was well aware what the judge was referring to.
Right. And yet, Jackie, hours after his arraignment, Donald Trump unleashed on the judge's wife, and the judge's daughter. Trump's sons have also attacked the judge and his family. There are already reported threats against Judge Marchand and his family. Might this factor into a future gag order? What recourse does the judge or the court have, given what the former president did after the admonition hours earlier in the courtroom?
Well, it's sort of a lose-lose situation for prosecutors and for the judge here. And our reporting on sort of the Trump legal team side of things is that if this judge goes ahead and does ultimately issue a gag order, that is only going to sort of further make Donald Trump a martyr and a victim of this process. They will most likely continue to fundraise off of this case and these proceedings, and highlight the fact, if this judge does in fact implement some sort of gag order, that Trump is being silenced, and that this is just another example of the way that the judicial system is weaponized against conservatives. But what we do know is that if this rhetoric does continue, the judge did say that gives him, as well as the prosecution, an opportunity to come back to the court and argue for some more limits. Also, as well, the prosecution noted that if Trump did not listen to the judge, he could be found in contempt of the court.
This isn't the only case. The Manhattan case isn't the only case you've been looking at, Jackie. You've been reporting on all the other legal cases involving Donald Trump. That's the DOJ investigation into those classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago, the criminal probe of the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, and the efforts in Georgia to overturn the 2020 election. Does the Manhattan case have any effect on those investigations? Where do they stand?
I think there's been a lot of punditry and pontificating about how Bragg's decision to pursue this indictment takes pressure off of Special Counsel Jack Smith or Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. But the fact of the matter is most of these prosecutors are purists who really try to do their jobs without any sort of political considerations. And these investigations are all running parallel to each other and are working as expeditiously as possible, because the reality is that this will ultimately have some political repercussions as we're heading into a 2024 presidential season, where the target of this investigation is undoubtedly going to use this as a repeated talking point to whip up his base and to whip up his supporters. I think the question looking forward is, are these are future court appearances or future trials going to happen in the middle of the primaries, or is it going to happen after Trump has already been the nominee? So these are certain dates and deadlines that we're all keeping track of, but that we are led to believe that the prosecution is trying to simply ignore and focus on the facts that they have and how good and rock solid of a case they have.
Actually, and that anticipates the question I was going to ask, which is, Special Counsel Jack Smith, Fulton County DA Fani Willis. Who am I missing? There's one more. I'm missing, or maybe it's Jack Smith has got Letitia James. That's right, New York Attorney General Letitia James. I was going to ask you, do they even care about the political calendar that we're all watching, with the first Republican presidential debate slated for August, with Republican and Democratic presidential primaries kicking off in 2024? If I heard you correctly, they're not paying attention to that. They're paying attention to the law and their legal deadlines in their respective investigations.
Yeah, and that is at least what the people around them have consistently reinforced to us during our conversations with people who either have previously worked with them or who are currently working with these prosecutors. But there is no doubt that it's going to be challenging and more challenging to prosecute Trump if he is the nominee or potentially the president. And so, these cases take a lot of time and work to build, and you're already seeing people like the special counsel's office and Jack Smith working on an expedited timeline, potentially to try to avoid some of these pitfalls when it comes to presidential primaries and the political process.
That actually reminds me, I don't know if you have any reporting on this, Jackie, so I apologize in advance for putting you on the spot. The one big news that came out this week was that former Vice President Mike Pence, Donald Trump's vice president, announced that he will not fight the subpoena now to come in and testify before Jack Smith's grand jury. Do any idea when his testimony might happen?
Well, that's funny, Jonathan, because we were joking this week that it would have been a good time for him to have sneakily gone into DC District Court to appear before the grand jury without much notice or fanfare, because we were all sort of pointed at a million different things. But it is unclear when he's actually slated to appear, whether or not he's going to do so in person. Maybe he'll do so via Zoom. We know that Donald Trump's lawyers actually asked for some Zoom appearances for future court appearances with regards to the district attorney going forward, to sort of avoid the massive orchestration that was put together to support his appearance. Pence is obviously a bit of a less high profile figure, so it might not be as much of a production to get him to appear before the grand jury, but we anticipate this will happen imminently, just not exactly sure of the date.
And just to be clear, it is not, or maybe it is, standard operating procedure to say, for the court to say, or a grand jury to say, hey, on this date, this witness is coming in to testify. It's basically you and our colleagues in the media staking out all the entrances of the courthouse to see who's coming and going.
Yeah, I've had some lawyers who are affiliated with these cases joke to me that they have come up with disguises so that reporters don't recognize them when they're walking into the courthouse ahead of their clients.
That is, that's incredible. Jackie Alamany, congressional investigations reporter for the Washington Post, as always. Thank you for coming to First Look. Have a good weekend.
You too. Thanks for having me.
And we're going to keep the conversation going with the Opinions Roundtable in just a moment. Let's go to the opinion side of the Washington Post, where we will find Washington Post Deputy Opinion Editor David Vondrele and Washington Post Associate Editor Eugene Robinson. Both are Washington Post columnists. Gene, David, welcome back to First Look.
Good to be here, Jonathan.
Okay, so I just spent the first 12 minutes of the program talking about Donald Trump and everything that was happening earlier this week. But I want to start this conversation by talking about what on earth happened yesterday in Tennessee. I would love for each of you, to give me your reactions on what went down in Tennessee, where 3 Democratic lawmakers were set for expulsion by the Republican supermajority in the state House of Representatives. Two young black men, one white woman. The 2 black men were expelled. The white woman was spared from expulsion by 1 vote. David, I'll start with you with your reactions.
Oh, I was hoping you were going to start with Gene, Jonathan. My reaction is complicated. The first is that it's a terrible day that 2 elected lawmakers would be expelled from a state house based on their political activity. It's outrageous. The fact that they are 2 young black lawmakers is even worse. It's a terrible look for Tennessee, terrible look for obviously the Republican Party there. At another level, I'm heartsick about the entire process. This started with a school shooting in Nashville, 3 children and 3 staff members killed. Here we are a couple of weeks later, and we've had a protest with bullhorns on the floor of the state legislature, and we've had this debacle coming out of it. And I ask, what's been accomplished for child safety in the state of Tennessee? 0. A lot of people on TV, a lot of discussion about it, and nothing done for the kids of Tennessee or the United States of America.
That is a great point, bringing it back to like how this all got started. Gene, your reactions to what's happening in Tennessee.
Well, my reaction to what happened yesterday is pretty simple. I mean, the Tennessee state legislature, or the House, essentially said, y'all 3 have been acting up, and you 2 young black fellas, y'all get out of here. But the nice white lady can stay. That's what happened yesterday. Which is,
let's keep it real, Gene.
That's what happened. And David is right in that this started with a school shooting. 3 9-year-olds, 3 adults gunned down in a school in Nashville, and where are we? This is what we are doing. But I would take it a step further, because the expulsion of these 2 members of the Tennessee House, I think has galvanized so much attention, and I predict so much sort of political activity, political money, political, it has made this shooting and Tennessee's gun laws a focal point in a way that it wasn't before. And so I'm looking ahead, not months but years, because I think it will take some time before there's enough change in the Tennessee state government to actually do anything about gun violence. But I wouldn't be surprised if we look back at this week and saw the beginning of something really major.
I'm just wondering, one more question on this, and so we could move on to what happened at the beginning of this week. The multi-racial, multi-generational nature of the protests that erupted as a result of the shooting in Nashville. And to me, as tragic as all of this is, from the shooting to the expulsions, the demonstrations, I'm finding some hope in them, because to me, it seems to be a continuation of the things that are happening in the country, they're seeping down. And it seems to me that the American people are rising up in their own jurisdictions to push back against some of the extreme things that they're seeing happening in their own backyards. Am I reading too much into what's going on in Tennessee?
I don't
No,
think oh, go ahead, Gene.
no. Well, I'll just say very quickly, add what happened in Tennessee to what happened in Wisconsin earlier in the week, where abortion rights was a huge issue, and once again, Wade went in favor of reproductive rights and against Republican attempts to essentially take them all away. So, yes, I think something's happening at the grassroots level in states around the country. That's what I think, and I'm not that optimistic about our politics, but I'm starting to think something's going on.
Mm-hmm. David?
Absolutely, something's going on. The only thing I'd say is that there's grassroots activity and action and emotion and organizing going on the right as well. And
Right.
this is the trade-off in a vibrant democracy, and I believe we still have a very vibrant democracy in the United States. Not everyone agrees with me on that, but we're seeing instead of top-down politics in which elected party leaders in Washington or in the state capitals decide what's going to happen, the agenda is being set from the bottom up, and that looks very different when politics is being done from the ground up.
Okay, let's talk about Trump, because now that we have some distance from the circus, a consequential circus, but a circus all the same. How are you thinking about the unprecedented criminal indictment of a former president, Donald Trump? Gene?
Well, look, as you and Jackie Alamany pointed out, this is one of multiple investigations that could potentially lead to multiple indictments. And my view was that somebody had to go first, and so it turned out to be Alvin Bragg. I think he makes a compelling case that Donald Trump broke the law, whether it was 34 misdemeanors or 34 felonies. He's yet to prove, but he's got time and some ammunition to prove that, and he's gonna try. And in the meantime, before we get to the next step of this case, we're likely to see, well, we certainly will see some other court action in which Donald Trump is a defendant, because later this month, a federal court in New York is set to begin hearing a federal civil lawsuit against Trump, filed by E. Jean Carroll, a writer who claims that Donald Trump raped her in Bergdorf Goodman, the department store, in a dressing room back in the mid '90s, and this is a tort for which she can sue him for damages, and that's what she is doing, and that trial is supposed to begin on April 25th. So once again, you will have at least Donald Trump's attorneys and perhaps Donald Trump himself at a defense table in a court proceeding. So we should get used to seeing this.
Yeah, I can't believe I forgot about the E. Jean Carroll case where he has to testify. But but David, the Republican Party, Richard Nixon's Republican Party was the Law and Order Party. Ronald Reagan's Republican Party was the Morning in America Party. And now the Republican Party is in thrall to a man who said this week that federal police forces should be defunded, basically because of his arrest on Tuesday. Is this
Right.
really where the Republican Party is?
In 2009, George W. Bush left the White House. The economy was in a shambles. There'd been the worst economic collapse since the Depression, and we were bogged down in a war of choice that he had started. On foreign policy and on domestic policy, the party was a shambles. And what rose out of that wreckage is Donald Trump. And so it's not the Morning America Party, it's not the Law and Order Party, it's the Donald Trump Party. And until somebody comes up with a compelling agenda that more Republicans like than the Trump show, it's going to stay as it is. And to me, that's a tragedy because I believe America does best with two well-functioning parties, but we don't have two right now. We don't really have one, I would argue, because if we had a well-functioning Democratic Party, Alvin Bragg's weak case would not have been the first to go in such a politically charged environment. But it is what it is. So we kind of have the crazy party and the foolish party right now.
Ooh, Gene.
Well, I mean, I think if you phrased it as saying you have one non-functional party and one partly functional party, okay, I could certainly accept that. I do think that that hyperventilation about Bragg going first is just, I think it's just wrong, and I think it's going to seem irrelevant in the due course of time. And as I said, somebody had to go first, and he believed he was ready. And the whole taboo, the line we have crossed by filing criminal charges against a former president. Yes, there was a time when that was unthinkable. But there was a time when it was unthinkable that someone like Donald Trump would be elected president. And from everything we knew about Donald Trump, everything we knew about his history, the way he did business, the way he did, who he was, why did we not think this was, that he would be the one that would cause us to break that taboo? Weren't we always destined to end up here?
We did, Gene. We always knew.
I just want to point out that one legal scholar, Elie Mystal, on MSNBC last weekend during all the special coverage, made an interesting point about why DA Bragg went first. It has to do with statute of limitations, and that he was about to bump up against some, and so that's why he went first. Yeah. But we've got less than 10 minutes left and a lot to talk about. Let's turn our attention real quickly to former Vice President Mike Pence, who announced this week that he's not going to, he's going to go through and he's going to testify before Jack Smith's grand jury, special counsel Jack Smith's grand jury investigation into the January 6th insurrection. David, talk about the significance of that.
Well, it's legally important because he has very significant testimony to give about what he experienced inside the Capitol and his exchanges with the president and the people around the president. In that sense, it's very significant. From a political standpoint, I think what it tells us is that Vice President Pence doesn't see an upside for him in his not very promising presidential campaign of his own for defying the grand jury, for making himself into a martyr. And so he's decided to bite the bullet, move on, and see if time and opportunity presents him with some more promising ammunition for his campaign down the road.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about what I call the earthquake in the Midwest that happened Tuesday night while we were all focused on Lower Manhattan. Voters in Wisconsin and Chicago made their voices heard. David, I'll start with you with Wisconsin, where for the first time in 15 years, there is a liberal majority on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Am I wrong in thinking that that is a political earthquake?
Super important. Wisconsin was critical to Donald Trump's election in 2016, critical also to President Biden in 2020. This has been, and still is, one of the real swing states in the United States now. And you look at, say, former Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, who spent a career moving the state to the right, and now seeing all that undone, and importantly, over the abortion issue. The Republican Party has been claiming to want to hold this issue close for 50 years. Now they finally have their hands on it, and it's sticky indeed.
And Gene, in Chicago, go ahead, David.
No, I was just going to say Chicago's a different thing because that's an intramural battle. That's Democrats on Democrats, and the progressives did win that one, but I don't see that it has any implications for Republicans who don't basically exist in Chicago anymore.
Mm-hmm. But it does, Gene, but the Chicago race does have implications for Democrats because crime was a huge issue in Chicago. It is the reason why the incumbent mayor, Lori Lightfoot, is the first sitting Chicago mayor to lose in the primary in decades. I'm just wondering, what signal does Brandon Johnson's election in Chicago send to Democrats nationwide?
Jonathan, I'm going to basically agree with David that it doesn't send much of a message nationwide. And the reason is that in Chicago, there are a lot of issues that intersect, including race. And so, what played? I mean, there's a lot of concern among African Americans in Chicago about crime. There are a lot of African Americans who might prefer, who might question Brandon Johnson's approach to policing, but who might have voted for him because they had more questions about Paul Vallas. And so, exactly so, and whether he was, how much of a Democrat was he?
Right.
So Chicago's a complicated place. Big city politics in a place like Chicago.
And I'm
very
glad
hard
you
to
mentioned
draw a clean message. Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned Paul Vallas's name because the antipathy towards him among some Democrats was very high. One thing we didn't get a chance to talk about, and we can't talk about it because we're already over time, unemployment, the jobs numbers, 236,000 jobs created in March. Unemployment ticked down 3.5%. In short, the economy is still humming along. David Von Trailer, Eugene Robinson, thank you both for coming to First Look. We're out of time.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Have a good weekend. Head to WashingtonPostLive.com to find more information about next week's interviews and to register. I'm Jonathan Capehart. Thank you for watching Washington Post Live's First Look.